Welcome to Heels, Handbags, and Hustle. Step in faith, carry love, pursue God's calling. This is your host, Rachel Earp, and I'm so delighted that you found my show. My podcast is dedicated to encouraging women to be more bold, confident, and secure in their work and femininity. I've had the privilege of bringing on many outstanding women who share their journeys, stories, and successes with us. I believe women should embrace their God-given gifts and abilities without the entanglements of fear, comparison, or past mistakes. As a wife, business owner, and mom of 2 boys, one with Down syndrome, I have found such joy in the community of supportive women. My prayer is that this podcast elevates each person who listens and inspires a closer walk with God. Now, let's get to it, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Heels, Handbags, and Hustle podcast, friends. I am so excited that you are following the show, and if you're new and you have just discovered me, I just want to personally thank you for spending some time with me today. I want to share with you a little personal part of my story before we get into the conversation with my guest today, because I had to press pause on my podcast for a little bit of time due to a hurricane that had swept through our area again. 2 years ago, we went through Hurricane Ian, which was very devastating for our city and our community. And just a couple weeks ago, we had another massive hurricane, Milton, that came through that was just, we weren't sure like what was going to happen with this one. It was just one of those things where they were predicting that perhaps our entire city would be underwater. So it's been, thank God, we did not get the brunt of it that we thought we would. And I'm so thankful. But there's been, recovery and things that we've had to just kind of navigate through. And especially like the creature comforts that you get used to having, so there was a little period of time where there's a gap. So I just want to thank you for those who have continued to follow the show, for being patient with me, as we get everything back up and running. But today is such an honor to present to you my guest, because she is a very profound lady who has spoken so much over my life and into my life. And I want to read to you her bio quickly, because she has just done so much, and I'm excited to go into this conversation live with her. And I want you to hear about just a synopsis of her life. Her name is René Banglesdorf, and she is an entrepreneur, business strategist, author, podcast host, public speaker, and board member. She is the founder and CEO of the Aviation Collective, a leadership development company specifically designed to help aviation professionals and emerging leaders. Rene has served hundreds of business owners as a high-performance business coach over the last 5 years. Additionally, she was a co-founder of Charlie Bravo Aviation, a company that sells private jets, spanning nearly $1 billion in sales in 44 different countries under her tenure as CEO. Rene served on the FAA's Women in Aviation Advisory Board and is current chair of the Ohio University Department of Management and Strategic Development Advisory Board. Rene earned her private pilot license in 2021. I mean, guys, this is such an amazing bio, but even more amazing is her heart for God, her tenacity and strength and boldness, and the authentic way that she lives her life. And I have been so blessed to witness a part of that since I've known her. So without further ado, I'm excited to bring Rene on and have this conversation with a very dear friend. And I hope you guys enjoy. Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the Heels, Handbags, and Hustle podcast. I'm so glad that you're here, that you're tuning in, and my heart is just full to be able to bring on the guest that I have for you today. Her name is René Banglesdorf, and I legit had to ask her, how do you pronounce your last name? because it's one of those things where I hate to butcher someone's name when we're going live and recording, but I got it right. So she is such a profound lady. And I know I've kind of shared with you guys a little bit of her robust background, but Renee, I would love to invite you to share your little twist on, just give us like a short version of your story. And then we're going to dive in deep to some of the specific areas of your life. And I know this is going to be super fun. And Renee, just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, beautiful friend.
Oh my goodness, Rachel, I'm so honored to be here. And I know I was reflecting this morning before we got on to this recording, how long I've known you. And I was thinking, oh yeah, Rachel's been a part of my life for such a long time, but we met just about a year ago and we have formed such a close friendship. And I think that's because you have such a sweet, loving, giving, open heart. And I just adore you. So thank you for being my friend. It touches my heart to have friends like you.
Thank you.
I live in Texas. I've lived here for the last couple of decades. I've lived in Georgia, Alabama, Virginia, and Ohio before this, but I've lived in Texas the longest. So I call myself a Texan now for sure.
Yes.
I am an executive in the aviation industry, which is a pretty male dominated industry. I owned a aircraft brokerage for 15 years with my now ex-husband and bought and sold airplanes all over the world for a couple of decades, which was really, really fun and very challenging and helped me grow quite a bit. I am the mother of two, a son and a daughter, and I have 4 grandkids, 2 girls and 2 boys, which are just the light of my life.
Yes.
They're so much fun. And I live between 3 to the west of me and 1 to the east of me. So I get to see them quite a bit and it is absolutely delightful. So besides being in aviation, I'm also an author. I have a journalism background, so I love to write and contribute articles a couple of different places and just enjoy all of that. And the most important thing in my life is that I'm a follower of Jesus. I mean, that's my sustenance in the bad times and the brightness that illuminates the good times.
Oh, I love that so much. So the first time that I met you, I remember one of the things that just kind of struck me was, which I was, first off, I'm like, I am in such awe of this lady because when you walk into the room, you have such an authentic boldness and you are able to speak truth without apologizing for it. And I've always loved and admired that about you. But I know that for those of us who see someone or an individual with those qualities and characteristics, it's easy to think that you were just born that way. And I think to an extent, God does instill certain characteristics that's part of our personality, whether we're fiery or shy or just certain things by nature. But I always sensed that there was so much more to your story than what I was seeing now, the person that you are now. So I'd love to kind of dive into a little bit of those pieces because I feel that that is going to be such an inspiration to those who are listening, because it is so easy to fall into when you look at someone and you think, wow, she just has it all put together. She's done so much and she's just like everything amazing. But how did you get there? So I'd like to ask you first off, we've learned about the different things that you've done, but as far as who you are now, what was a very pivotal moment or a couple moments in your life that you could share that you can look back on and say, wow, this changed me a lot?
Well, with your permission, I'm just going to go deep.
Let's do it. I love that. Let's go deep.
And here's why, Rachel, because I feel like we see so much of people on the surface when we look at social media or when we meet someone in a group. We all like to try to look put together and to look like we have some answers. And sometimes on the inside, we're just crushed. We're just so broken.
Yeah.
And we're so defeated and maybe we're depressed or we're anxious. And so I don't want to beat around the bush. I want to go to the deep places and talk about the failures and talk about the brokenness and talk about the shame, because I think that in sharing those things, we help other people get in touch with who they are at the core and know that who they are at the core is a valuable person. Right.
Yeah.
So I'll start with when I was a little girl, I was very shy, very painfully shy. And I think you can probably look at me now and go, what?
I would have never imagined that at all.
But if you go back and ask my high school classmates, because I've bumped into a couple of them over the last few years, they're like, oh my gosh, you were so shy. And I was. But one of the reasons that I was shy is because of another SH word called shame. And I think from a very, very young age, my parents expected a lot out of me, which is typical of parents. I expected a lot out of my kids as well. And I didn't realize this until I was in my 50s. I was ashamed of not being perfect. So I made a lot of choices when I was young to try to please people. I tried to be a perfect big sister to please my parents. I tried to be compliant and, yes, to my detriment, girlfriend, to try to please the boys that I wanted to gain some validity from.
Yeah.
I would even lie to my parents because I didn't want them to know that I had made poor decisions. And all of that heaped up over years added up to a lot of shame. And so even in my marriage, which I was married for 32 years and I've been divorced for just about one, I had a lot of people-pleasing behaviors, and it made me very codependent. And it made my relationship with the father of my children very toxic. I mean, he had his own issues for sure, but mine were rooted in trying to be the person that I thought that he wanted me to be, right, and not being the person that God created me to be. So I had a lot of deep work to do as I was healing from that relationship and from that necessary ending to that relationship. It's caused me to examine who God made me to be. And it's in examining that I've learned that he made me to be a revealer of truth. And that's specific to me. And if you go back in my life, you can see that I always wanted to be in the know. And, that can turn into gossip, which I try really hard not to do. But it also led me to a career path in journalism. So I went to college for journalism because I wanted to tell the truth. I wanted to tell the stories of what was going on in people's lives or in the world at large. And now you see that played out in the people that I coach. I do some executive coaching now in the groups that I'm in a leadership role in or not in a leadership role in. And you've experienced this, me telling you the truth, even when it was a truth that perhaps you didn't feel comfortable with, but I'm telling you what I see in you that's beautiful. And sometimes that's hard to accept. And so there's just there's a lot there, and I throw a lot out there. You know your audience better than me. What pieces of that do you want to dive into?
Oh my gosh. Well, all of them. But I first off appreciate that that you're able to be transparent about what the real life looks like, because life isn't always a walk through the tulip patch, as they say. There's a lot of storms that we go through, and self-discovery, which can be very difficult for some people. And I know that is something that I have struggled with, even, is understanding. You mentioned the core of who you are and what God created you to be. And I think over time, as we go through different circumstances, we go through trials, we go through tribulations, and that can stem all the way into childhood, that we don't recognize ourselves one day. We have that like epiphany, and we look in the mirror and we're like, who am I? I don't recognize myself anymore. And as also a people pleaser myself by nature, I so resonate with the stuff that you said, because when we do that, we are not being authentic to ourselves. And we, in a sense, are almost apologizing to people for being who we are because we're trying to formulate a different version of ourselves to make that person happy. And the pitfall with that is it never usually works out very long. You can keep trying and trying, but at some point you're going to slip up, you're going to fall off that pedestal, and then what? Then how do you move forward after that? Hey friends, I'm just pressing pause for a moment. I know this conversation is so good, but I have something that I wanted to share with all of you guys. If you're craving some inspiration and encouragement, especially for those of us who are moms with unique journeys. So whether you parent a special needs child, maybe you're a single mom and you're just really navigating through trying to raise children or a child on your own, whatever that unique journey is, and it just could be a personal story that you're going through that has been challenging, I have created a devotion just for you. It is something you can get access to for free. There's no strings attached whatsoever. I'm going to link it in the show notes for you guys, because sometimes just a few words of encouragement that you can dive into, knowing you're not alone in this journey, can have such an impact on your day and on your outlook on life. And it's just something that I felt called to create and share for you guys. And it's something that I wrote myself. So I would love for you to take advantage of that offer. Once again, the link is in the show notes. I hope you guys will just check it out, and I would love to be able to deliver that straight to your inbox. So without further ado, let's just get right back into the show. So I'd love to talk about the shame piece of it, because I know that is so hard when you are living with that cloak of shame that you feel is over your life, because that is a bondage. And I'd love to know, how did you break free from that? What was your first step? Like, how do you even begin to sit with it and discern, like, this is what I'm going through. How do I get that? How do I get out of this?
Yeah, there was a book that I read, and I know we've talked about this book before. It's called Living Fearless, or Living Fearlessly. It's by a man by the name of Jamie Winship. And the book, you can go through it in a day, just spend the whole day with it, and you do the journal prompts that are in it. And his premise is that if you're living in who God called you to be, you can live in a completely fearless state. Because the very safest place for you to be is in the center of God's will, even if there's chaos all around you. Yeah. And he was served in the Middle East, teaching Muslims about Christ. And that is a very scary place to be, but it was the safest place he could possibly be, because God calls him a militant peacekeeper. And so going through Jamie's book is how I really discovered that God calls me a revealer of truth. And I had to go through lots of other steps and lots of other things before that, right? I had to get clear on the fact that I'm a daughter of the King. I'm a daughter. And like feeling that and really feeling it to my soul was very helpful, because that makes me royal, not a failure.
Right.
It makes me beautiful inside, not a fraud. And there were truths that I had to accept about myself in order to see myself clearly. And when I began to see myself clearly is when the cloak of shame started lifting from me. But it's doing a couple of things, right? It's agreeing with God about what he says about me. And it's disassociating myself from the identity that Satan's tried to heap on me.
Wow.
So if I lie, God says that's bad behavior and that's wrong. Satan says I'm a liar. So I have to say, you know what? I'm not a liar. I told some lies and I've repented from that.
Right.
I'm not a gossiper or a bad friend. I've repeated some gossip and that wasn't great behavior. And I'm not going to do that anymore.
Right.
And it was interesting. I walked through this one particular like aha moment with my counselor, who's amazing. And we were talking about having sex outside of marriage. And when I was younger, I did that all the time. And in fact, that's how I ended up getting pregnant and being married to the father of my children. But then when we were talking about me starting to date, I was like, I don't know how to say no to that, but I don't want to do it because I don't feel like that's God's plan for me. I feel like God's plan for me at 54 is to not have sex outside of marriage, even though that's very socially acceptable these days.
Right.
And she said, well, this is a different you. Mm-hmm. And she's like, this you makes choices that protect her heart. Yeah. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. I don't have to be promiscuous. Mm-hmm. I can be the daughter of God that he's called me to be, right, and make the decision to not go there because I feel it would open me up to heartbreak. It would open me up to, I don't know, STDs. It would open me up to
opening those can of worms, like
opening that can of worms and not just physically or emotionally, right, but also spiritually, because I'm a strong believer that when you have sex outside of marriage, you're opening yourself up to any demonic activity that might be connected to that. And so I made the decision to be a different me. Yeah. And you know what? That me is okay being that me. That me is okay setting that boundary. That me feels really good telling my young adult nieces and nephews, like, hey, I'm making this choice and I'm sticking to it. Yeah. That me feels really confident because I've set boundaries for myself. And inside of those boundaries, shame doesn't exist.
That's right. That's right.
So getting clear on who I am and who I want to be, and throwing away the things that the enemy says about me, rejecting those things is how you begin to dismantle that cloak of shame.
How you break that down so well. And one of the things that, as you were talking, kind of pivoting back to identity, which I think when we understand, and you mentioned, like, for example, if you were to tell a lie or something that you're not a liar, and those are the things, because the thing with that is when we believe that, we continue to identify as that, and then the cycle doesn't stop. It keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper. But when we remember, my identity is, I am a child of God. Like you said, I am a daughter of the King. And you remember, well, is this something that the daughter of the King should do? Or should, you picture how beautiful and precious that God calls us to be. It does change the decisions that you make, but we're not perfect in ourselves. And God, that is why we need him. Because and you mentioned at the beginning of your story, the perfection and trying to be like, you were ashamed that you weren't doing everything perfectly, because that is something that we put on ourselves that is just too much. That is why we need him. And when we surrender that to him, that does lift such a cloak of shame off of us and lightens our load tremendously, because then we realize, I am put here on this earth to shine the way that God made me to be, because there's people that need that. They need me to be who I am, not who someone else is. God created us all to be very unique. And he speaks about that many times in his word, that we are beautifully and wonderfully made. And his handiwork is always beautiful. But we have a tendency to think, well, I really think someone else looks more beautiful than me, or this, and this. But, God has his reasons for why he gives us the gifts and abilities that he has. And there's nothing more freeing than walking boldly and living our life authentic to that. So I appreciate that you were able to talk about the work, because I think people, they look at it and it's so daunting, but you have to do the work. And it sounds like you were able to do the work and you realized, I've got some work to do to figure out, all of the different
100%.
pieces. Yeah, it doesn't,
Yeah,
it's not a
100%.
magical thing.
Well, one of the things that I think that we put on ourselves, especially if you're a firstborn type A personality like me, is that failure is bad. And I think, so many times you get asked like, hey, if you could go back and talk to your 25-year-old self, what would you tell her? And I would tell her to take more risks. Failure is not a bad thing. Failure is where you grow. We don't grow from being successful. We grow from trying for something that's outside of our capabilities and growing in that area. And if we think back about like, you're such an amazing mama, and I love watching you parent little Dale and Zeke. It's such a beautiful thing. But when we see them try something and don't get it quite right and try again, like learning to ride a bike or learning to walk or learning to crawl, like we're cheering at their progress.
Right.
And the Lord does that for us, right?
Yes.
He expects us to fall on our faces and need his help to get back up, because that means that we're growing. And he always wants us to be growing, and there's always more room to grow. So if I could impart something to my younger self, or impart something to those of you who are listening, it's try the hard thing. Like learn how to do something that you feel really uncomfortable doing, and watch how much he grows you and develops your character. Case in point of this for me is that I learned how to fly when I was 51 years old.
Oh my gosh.
I got challenged by some women who God brought into my life. And I looked at, wow, that's going to be really hard. I don't know if I'm capable of doing this. I don't know if I have the situational awareness to do it. I don't know if I'm coordinated enough to do it. I'm a little clumsy. And it was so hard, Rachel, but I set myself up to succeed. I set myself up. I removed as many obstacles as I could. So one thing that gets in the way of learning how to fly, and hopefully this will be an object lesson, is weather. Another thing is having the airplane break down or be unavailable. Another thing is having an instructor do something else or be working with other students. Another thing is like having the knowledge that you learned in your last lesson atrophy if you have a long time between lessons. So I set myself up. I went out to Northern California in May of 2021, and I spent 1 month with the same airplane and the same instructor and 12 hours of instruction and flying a day for close to 4 weeks, and came out of that with my pilot's license. It took me a long time to learn how to land. I felt so bad for my instructor, but I persevered.
Yeah.
I pushed through. There was no way I was gonna allow myself to not come out of that without a pilot's license, if at all possible. If I was capable, I wanted to do it. And what I found is that it built so much confidence in me, because I probably practiced 400 landings before I could do it well.
Right.
So that means 400 times my instructor had to help me. I bounced the landing a little bit, or I felt like it was rough until I really got it right.
Yeah.
Maybe it was only 200. It felt like 400. But it's a lot. That's a lot more than 1 or 2 and then giving up. Right. You just have to continue to persevere. You have to push through. But I set a goal for myself. I eliminated as many obstacles as I could. Right. And I pressed through until I finished the goal. And that's what builds confidence.
Yep. So much depth to that just right there. And I love that you calculated, this is the outcome that I want to strive for. And like you said, I think people look at any type of goal that we have, and whether, it's starting a business or writing a book or whatever the thing is, we look at it and we think that it's just, you want to just jump right to the outcome, but there's a journey through all of it. And a lot of that does come through, either trial and error, or, you're going to keep practicing, you're going to fail, you're going to try again, you're going to do a little bit better. And you have to be willing, once again, this comes back to doing the work part of it, but you did the work. And you also, I love this about you, because I don't think I would have done it. Probably, I know for a fact I wouldn't have had the presence of mind to think, oh, well, I'm going to go to California and do it this, and know that I need to spend time with that airplane and with that instructor and put in the consistent hours. And it's a super funny story around that. Here's an example of the other aspect of it. What happens when you don't do that and you do really majorly fail? When I first decided to get my insurance license, I had just had little Dale, and I was nursing him at the time, up, exhausted, and decided I'm going to get my insurance license. This will be super easy. Straight A college student, no biggie. I got this. Forgetting that there had been so much time in between me graduating and doing all of that too. It had been a few years. So getting back into the swing of taking a course and passing tests and all that, I underestimated that time gap, like you were saying. So I studied, and I would do like a few chapters one night, late at night, exhausted. A week would pass, and then I would do the next chapter. And needless to say, I dragged this whole thing out. This should have been done in 2 weeks. It took me a month to do. To my detriment, I had to drive 3.5 hours down to take the test, because that was the local state testing center. And I failed the test by 2 points, which was devastating to me, because I had never failed a test. First off, I took it as, it's not meant to be, this is, I failed it. This is God telling me I shouldn't do this. And of course, it was embarrassing to tell my husband, who barely graduated high school, that I had failed, and he passed his with a 98, I think, in New York State, which was the hardest state. So there was a lot wrapped around that. But then I thought, I can't just leave that as I failed. So I thought, I'm going to retake the course and take the test again. And I did, and I failed the test again. So 2 times this happened. And by the 3rd time, I was so angry. I was just like, I'm going to pass this if I have to take it 10 times, because I was angry that I was failing it. And what I was doing in retrospect, and I tell all of our teams this because I learned through this lesson, was I was not studying and doing this consistently. I was, forgetting things. And on my test, I would go back and change the answer and second guess myself. I knew the answers, but I second guessed myself, and I would change them last second. And that doubt, when you allow doubt to creep in, that can also throw you off your game majorly. And I learned so much from that. And I pray that I never have to take a test like that again. But if I did, I know this is what I would do differently. And like you said, you grow through the failing. I failed, and I could have taken that as not meant to be. And here, 14 years later, I'm still doing the thing. And, I've loved it. It has been such a great confidence booster in my life as well. So, there's a lot, there's 2 examples, you guys that are listening, of what you should do and what you shouldn't do. So I love that so much. And you also, I know you had mentioned when we were, you were talking a little bit about your story about writing. And I'd love to talk briefly. I know you recently had a book that just came out that I absolutely adore. I'm so excited about it. I have it right here. Such an amazing book. And I feel like we should talk about this briefly, because this book is so much about spiritual warfare. And in our walk with Christ, we are going to face warfare. And I think a lot of us are not equipped to fight those demons, fight those battles that we go through. And sometimes we forget that a lot of the hardships that we go through in life, there's so much more to it than just the circumstance. There's a whole other realm. And that's why it's so important to be put on the full armor of God. So what inspired you to write Battleground? And talk to us a little bit about that journey.
My goodness. I started writing Battleground when my kids were in middle school and high school.
Really? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, the beginning of middle school and high school. And I published a version of that book then 17 years ago. And then I was so excited about it and decided that I was going to go backwards and see if I could get a publisher to buy it from me. So I went to a conference and I had an agent look at the first chapter of it. And she was so kind, yet so truthful to me. And in much nicer words than this, told me that my writing was awful. She's like, your story might be good, but your point of view isn't good. You don't have one main character. Publishers are looking for this, this, and this. You don't have any of those things. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a lot of work. And so I just let it sit for a while. And then I started working with a business and life coach, and he was connected in the publishing arena. And I asked him to find me a coach that could help me fix the writing. And this was probably 5 or 6 years ago. And so I started working with a coach on my manuscript, and we wrestled with it and learned how to show instead of telling, like illustrating the anger instead of saying this character was angry. Because I had a journalistic way of writing.
Right.
And that's very different than a fiction way of writing. And so those two things were in conflict in me. So we started to sort that out. We took a pause from that book and worked on a nonfiction book together, which I published that's a little bit about my life called Stand Up, and then went back to the fiction work. And it was really interesting as I wrestled with this. And I probably had what's in your hand or sitting on your desk right there, Rachel, is probably the 6th or 7th version of the book. I did rewrites through the first 20 or 25 chapters 6 or 7 times to get my characters right, to get my main character dialed in and to really create the story that you can read in there today. So it was a long journey.
Yeah.
And one of our mutual friends said, there is a lot of spiritual truth in this book. There's a lot of theology in here that's presented in a very palatable way for young adults primarily. So it's a young adult supernatural thriller. And I can tell you a little more about it if you want me to tell your audience.
I would love that. Please do.
Okay. So the book itself is, the main character of the book is an angel named Perdona. And Perdona has never been to Earth before. He's always served the Lord in the throne room. He's been a worshiping angel for his entire existence. And a group of warriors comes back from Earth, and they're looking weary and they're frustrated. And he's eavesdropping on this conversation and thinks like, I don't understand how it's so difficult. And God decides to send him to Earth. And so the opening scene of the book is him coming to Earth for the very first time and writing letters back to the other angels in heaven about what Earth is like and what this battle is that he's been dropped into. So you see his insights in the form of letters back to the angels who also have never experienced Earth about every 3rd chapter. And then in parallel to that, you see what's going on in the natural realm with 5 teenagers who God's assigned to a mission, even though they don't know him yet. And so these 5 characters, who most of them don't know each other, get pulled into this adventure. And you see them going through this adventure that feels like everyday life, that would feel like everyday life to a teenager to some extent, with a little interference from angels and demons. And one of the things that it's designed to do is to open our eyes to the fact that we have a very real enemy who is 24/7 out to steal, kill, and destroy. And we have a very real creator who is 24/7 out to restore relationship between us and him.
Wow.
And so this battle of good and evil is being played out all the time.
Yeah.
And we're mostly unaware of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things that one of the themes that I really like to stress in the book is that everything that God does is for relationship with us. Everything he does concerning us is for relationship with us. And that our prayers can influence that, and our actions can influence that. When we choose to do the right thing,
Yes.
over the wrong thing, we're protected. Like when I choose not to have sex outside of marriage, there's a level of protection in my life that wouldn't otherwise be there.
That's right.
When I choose to tell the truth, when I choose to act in integrity, when I don't behave unethically or irresponsibly in business, there's a level of protection there. Now, that doesn't mean the enemy's not also going to attack, but God has the ability to protect me in a better way. And the angels surrounding me have the ability to protect me in a better way when I'm in cooperation with God's rules.
Yes.
Also, when I'm praying, or even when my great great grandmother was praying for me, God can use those prayers to intercede on my behalf. So he can step in and answer to prayers that have already been prayed long ago. He can pull them forward because he's not constrained by time. And he can also use the prayers of people who don't even know that they're praying for me, but they're praying for people who live in my area or people who work for a certain company. And so God uses so many different things to orchestrate us having a deeper relationship with him or having an initial relationship with him. And so that's what I illustrate in this book.
Oh, it opened up an entirely different perspective on not just as being earth dwellers that we are here on this earth, but also how there is such a different realm that we don't recognize. But once we start to look at you even look at different points in the Bible where there was a lot of spiritual warfare. And you talked about, it's so crazy you mentioned about the interceding prayers. I've often wondered, you know how you'll pray for someone, whether it's for their salvation or for their healing or for a certain outcome. And do you ever have those times where you wondered, why am I continuing to pray about this? Is God already have the outcome predetermined? Will this change anything? You know, what does it truly mean the more you think about prayer and how powerful that prayer really is? Your prayer starts to change. And there's even, if you look at the story of Lot in the Bible, where the angels came and told him to leave the city because, God was going to destroy the city and the people there were wicked. And there was so much that God wanted to protect him from. And you mentioned the word protection. And that is a beautiful attribute of God because even as a parent, what is your first instinct, whether they like it or they don't like it, or they understand or they don't understand? As a parent, I need to protect my child from this. I need to protect them if they're going to run across the street and teach them and help them. And when you're a child, you don't understand, why is mommy or daddy telling me this? Like, this is so much fun, or, this feels good, or this feels right. But there's things that God command, like the commandments and the different things in the Bible that he talks about, not to make our life miserable, but to protect us and protect our hearts. And I love that you mentioned that with, the sex outside of marriage, because I think a lot of people look at it as this confining, strict, restricting thing, when God actually has such a deeper meaning and purpose behind it for our good. And because it is such a beautiful and sacred thing, there is so much more to it than just the physical act of intimacy. It is very sacred. And people don't understand that, these days. And it's very sad because there's so many, of our younger people, especially, that they just, they don't understand the beauty behind it, the fulfillment that can come with it when we allow God to make it beautiful in our lives. And I appreciate that I look at you, and no matter what, anything from the past, it doesn't mean you can't start forward, aligning yourself with the wonderful things that he has in store for us. That is so amazing. And I love that you're not ashamed to talk about it, because I think a lot of people just don't even know, like, what would I do? And here you are in this phase in your life, and just still inspiring and speaking truth. Going back to that, you've spoken a lot of truth over my life, and that is so powerful. And I wish the world had more Renes, but there's only one René Banglesdorf. Like there's only one you, and I'm so blessed and privileged that God allowed our paths to cross. And it's neat to look back at how that even works out. I look back and like, how did this even happen? And you just feel so grateful because God orchestrates things. And we don't see it at the time, but here we are. Here you are on my show. And I love this book so much. I'm so excited that you are writing something too for our young adults. I feel like you have a heart for our youth and giving them wisdom and once again speaking truth over them, because there's not a lot, unfortunately, truth in our day and age. And truth is one of the most powerful tools that we can have to live a thriving and abundant life. And I feel like you embody that so well. So,
Rachel, that's such a great compliment. You mentioned a little bit ago the spiritual armor, and one of the main pieces of spiritual armor is a belt of truth.
mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
if you look at a Roman soldier, the belt of truth, or the belt on the Roman soldier, held the breastplate in place. And it also gave a place for all of the tools to hang, right? It would be a hatchet or a sword or a knife or a dagger would be held in this belt that they put on. You think about like a mechanic's belt or a policeman's belt holding the tools of their trade. But it also held the breastplate of righteousness, or the breastplate, what protects your heart, in place as well. And so truth is paramount to our existence and our ability to defend ourselves in that manner. It's where everything else hangs off of truth.
Wow, that's so true. I'm picturing like the gladiators. When I went to Rome and went to the Colosseum, it's frightful to think of what life would have been like when they had, when wars and battles were fought truly in that manner. But if you look at the scripture that talks about putting on the whole armor of God, if you look at the other part of it, he says why. And going back to what you were saying, that there is an enemy of ours that is walking about seeking whom he may devour. And God says, when you put on the full armor of God, then you can withstand the fiery darts, because they're going to come. They are going to come to every one of us. None of us are immune to it. None of us go through life having the perfect life. Some of us have maybe more of those battles out in the open than others. Some of the battles that many of us face are the deeper inward battles of our minds and our hearts. But, and I'm thinking back to the very first part of our conversation on this episode. Sometimes, we look like we have it all put together, but there's hurt, there's shame, there's a lot of things that we all deal with. But it's important to recognize it, to ask for help, to bring people into our lives who will speak truth to us, who will sit in it with us, and who will pray for us and encourage us. Those things are so important. So I hope that those of you who are listening will feel encouraged and know that these battles, at the end of the day, you don't have to fight them alone. And God is here to give you the strength that you need to go through whatever it is life is going to throw your way, because sometimes we think we have our life planned out and God decides to completely change our path. And Renee's like, yes, I look at all the things that you are now that you probably would have never dreamt that you'd be. But before we kind of end this episode, is there any last words of encouragement that you have specifically for the woman who's listening, who I want to go just speak again about the shame, who's looking back at her life and she's not happy with herself and she feels broken. She feels that her life has just crumbled at her feet and she doesn't even know how to start picking up the pieces. What are some encouraging words that you can speak over her, Renee?
First of all, I just want to say, sister, Jesus loves you, and everything about what he does here on earth is to have relationship with you. So if you feel abandoned, if you feel rejected, if you feel unwanted, if you feel broken, he came for you. So first of all, know that if you are willing to have a relationship with Jesus, he wants more than anything to have a relationship with you. So hear that. And then second, the piece that's yours to do is to be intentional. So be intentional about fixing your eyes on him. Be intentional about learning what he says about you. Be intentional about who you allow to speak into your life. Be intentional about getting the help that you need. There is no shame in telling people that you need help. There's no shame in getting therapy. There's no shame in breaking down at the front of a church and crying.
Yes.
We're supposed to be, it's 100% of us have failure in our lives because 100% of us are human.
Right.
And God created us to be human, and he allowed us free will so that we could freely choose him. Because if you think about it, when your kid is given a choice, when your child is given a choice between something that's not great and something that's a good choice, aren't you more proud of them when they choose the good? And that's the same with God. You can start today making choices toward that relationship with the Lord. Because he may not do things your way, but he does things for your good. And you should know that.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I should frame that last thing that you just said. He may not do things your way, but he does it for your good. What a beautiful way to end this episode. And just sit with that phrase, because that is powerful and beautiful and so true. So much truth to that. So thank you for sharing your story so authentically. Thank you for coming onto the show. It's such an honor to have you on here, but also such an honor to have your friendship and your support in my own life, Rene. So thank you for that. And I can't wait to see what God continues to do in you and through you. It's amazing. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Rachel. And for those who are looking for my book, I wrote that under my first and my middle name because my name, so it's René Marlena. And those two names mean reborn, enduring legacy. And there's nothing that I can say more about what God's done in my life than that.
Yes. I didn't even know, that is so perfect. Why am I not surprised? You embody those things so well. And I'll be sure to link it in the show notes for you guys too, so that you can grab yourself a copy. It is absolutely worth every single word that you read. Super excited about that. But yes, thank you again for coming on, Rene. And for those really quick who do want to follow you, just in general, besides just your book, what's the best way they can get in touch with you?
So my social media is at René Banglesdorf. I'm mostly on Instagram, but I also have Facebook and LinkedIn. And then my author Instagram is at author René Marlena. So if you want to read more about the book, that's the best handle for me.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much, friends.
Thank you. Always so good to see you.
Thank you.
Well, friends, I just want to thank you for listening today. And if this show has meant something to you, please leave a review or rating on whatever platform you're listening to. Also, make sure you follow the show. This helps me continue bringing episodes like this where women can share their stories and link arms together. I hope you feel inspired and refreshed. Now get out there and hustle, girlfriends.